What's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of the Strength for Your Purpose podcast. We are rolling along here. Another week, another fantastic conversation coming your way. And just from the little snippet of things we chatted about before we started recording, I know I'm already interested to learn more. So I know that you all are going to get a ton of value out of this as well. And a little bit of announcement coming along with this guest. This is going to be a bit of a recurring thing. Not necessarily always this guest, but we're going to have some different people sort of associated with similar topics and from the same place. So I guess without further ado here, I am welcoming now recurring guest, Andrew Herman, back on the podcast. Andrew, what's going on, man?
What's going on, Phil? How you doing?
I'm doing great and really excited to get into this. But Andrew is with Iron Legion Strength Co. in Westbrook, and we're going to be kind of bringing you an episode just about once a month here, moving forward until I don't know, maybe forever. We'll see. Whatever, wherever this endeavor goes. But I'm excited because they've got a lot of different stuff to offer over there and a lot of different people to bring some really great information to you all listening to the podcast here. So, Andrew, why don't we start there? Talk a little bit, refresh people's memories, or if they didn't have a chance to listen to your previous episode, talk a little bit about yourself, what you do over there at Iron Legion, and what Iron Legion has to offer.
Yeah. So my name is Andrew Herman. Like you said, I am a personal trainer and the nutrition coach over at Iron Legion Strength Co. in Westbrook. We are a private personal training gym where we offer one-on-one training sessions, primarily around the big three lifts. So the squat, the bench, and the deadlift. We teach you how to do it from the ground up. Our bread and butter is teaching people who have never really kind of worked with weights before, who are interested in learning how to strength train. So we work with complete rookies and teach you from the ground up. And honestly, those are some of the most fun people to train because I think they get the most benefit out of it and the most enjoyment. So
Sure.
that's fun. But I also run the nutrition side of it, and we host a lot of seminars there. So this is going to be a fun recurring monthly theme. Like you said, not just with me, but we have a bunch of coaches that have a lot of experience, and we also have a bunch of people associated with the gym that have really good knowledge that we're hoping to get on here. So it should be fun.
No, that's awesome. And that's one of the things I'm super excited about with this too, is I know when you and I talked about this and we're talking about setting this up, you got a lot of different coaches over there who, maybe the core of what you're all teaching is pretty similar, and you're all teaching it from a same set of values, but it's from a variety of different backgrounds. So that's what this sort of recurring Iron Legion podcast here on the Strength for Your Purpose podcast is gonna look like, bringing a variety of different viewpoints to maybe some different topics, but also similar topics, to give you all a better breadth of information, which is really cool.
Yeah, and just kind of like one more quick plug is like that's one of the benefits of the gym, right? Is like I say it all the time, is we just have a lot of people with different backgrounds. Like previously we talked, like my background's in bodybuilding, so I bring a lot of that to it. We have a lot of coaches with CrossFit, powerlifting, mobility backgrounds, pre and postnatal backgrounds. So there's something for everyone, and there's a breadth of knowledge across the board. So it'll be good to get people on here and talk about different topics and educating the audiences, which will be nice.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. That's what we're all about here on the Strength for Your Purpose podcast. So looking forward to that. But today, let's jump right in. This is a great segue into what we want to talk about today. We're going to talk about something that I think everyone would say that they are vaguely familiar with, but could probably also not tell you much more about it than that they're vaguely familiar with it.
Right.
And that topic is gut health and the gut brain axis.
Yep.
So I'm just gonna let you kick this off here. I'm excited to hear what you have to say about this, because I fall in that category of what I just described.
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. I mean, most people, like we talked about right before we kicked this off, it's kind of a punchy buzzword these days, but a lot of people don't know quite what exactly it is. They've heard bits and pieces. They've heard certain things, but not quite sure exactly what's going on, right? And so I got interested in this because I've been coaching strength coaching at Iron Legion for like 6 years now, and I've been doing the nutrition over there for like 3 or 4. And that all started because I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease several years ago. So I have a pretty severe case, autoimmune disease, and I was given medication for it. And the medication I was given has had pretty severe side effects, and really, it was kind of a very aggressive kind of pseudo cancer drug, and it didn't, feel good in my body. So I looked at alternative methods, and this is where I really started to dig into nutrition and food, and how to heal myself with natural stuff, and this is where the gut really starts to come into play. And this is really cool stuff. It's the forefront of kind of nutrition science these days.
Mm.
A lot of the studies that are being done are only as old as like 2013, 2014, and in
Wow.
terms of science, that's really new.
Really new. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So this is very new stuff, and very cool stuff. And there's a lot of unknowns still, but we're learning a lot. So
Yeah.
basically, the idea is the stomach and the brain are directly connected, right? We've always previously we've thought that the stomach and the lymphatic system kind of ended around the neck area and stuff up in here, but no, it's directly connected into the brain. And what that means is anything that's done in the stomach is also felt in the brain, and vice versa.
Mm.
Okay. And so why this has a lot of cool effects. I mean, this is just like the basics of it, right? That you can expand on this forever. But
Sure.
why this is important is the gut is actually like your second brain. And a lot of people are actually arguing that it has more to do controlling and feeling your body than your brain actually does.
Huh.
And so what they're finding is people who have poor gut health have a higher chance of things like depression, anxiety,
Mm.
stress, autoimmune diseases, cancer, severe medical issues, and certain things like that. They're even linking diabetes. I read a study this morning that said poor gut health links is being linked to the decision if you're motivated to work out or not.
Mm.
So there's a lot of crazy things that are kind of coming from this, and so every person has a unique bacteria system in their stomach,
Mm.
and it can go good or it can go bad depending on what you feed it, right? So if you're constantly ingesting processed foods and fake sugars and chemicals and all this stuff,
Yeah.
that's going to negatively impact that gut bacteria, and you're going to have more issues with depression, stress, anxiety, all that stuff I just said, because the gut and the brain are directly connected,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense for a couple reasons. I mean, my mind goes to the fact that it it's the you know, an entry point, right? I mean,
Yep.
we're taking air into our lungs. That's obviously an entry point. The
Yep.
only other entry point is that way,
Mhm.
right? Food,
Yep.
food into the gut. So that makes a lot of sense. The, my thought process here goes, and I really I'm really interested to hear your thought of this and your answer
Yep.
to this question. Uh, that what you just mentioned about the change in our bacteria
Yep.
in our gut
Yep.
and those responses to it, is that more related to sort of the brain trying to figure out what's going on and then responding to it in ways that are, maybe sending off signals of like more like alarm to us, and the confusion behind those things, or maybe why some of those things in some people don't get treated effectively by means that would normally effectively treat it. Is that why that confusion can happen a little bit, is because the brain is maybe interpreting this in a completely different way. So therefore, like depression specifically, like treating someone with depression through avenues that normally would work really well to treat depression
Yep.
might not be working because it's not coming from the same mechanism that other depression is coming from. Do you see what I'm saying there?
Yeah. I kind of get what you're getting at here. So a couple things on that, right? So they actually know now that the majority of serotonin, right, the feel good drug in your body is formulated and made up and stored in your gut. So if you have bad bacteria in there and it's a negative environment, right, that's going to definitely affect the production of serotonin in your body. Okay, that obviously will affect depression. But there's like three real ways that this can like affect your brain. Okay, so the first one is certain bacteria can release things called neurotransmitters that help send message to the brain and trigger your digestive tract. So like when you eat certain foods that contain certain bacteria in there, it's going to release signals as you digest it that basically trigger your brain to stop digestion. Okay.
Yeah.
That's kind of, that's how much influence it'll have. So super crazy.
Yeah.
Number two is when you like digest food, the microbes in the stomach, they produce something called metabolites. It's a byproduct of digestion, right? And these metabolites also produce signals that get sent to the brain. And if you're eating poor food and your body's digesting this poor food, you're sending these poor signals to your brain, causing inflammation, which can cause the stress, anxiety, depression, all that stuff. Okay. The other thing, which is more kind of where I'm at, and this is more a hypothesis kind of in the studies right now, is your stomach has a cell lining, right? It has a wall around it, which keeps things from permeating through. All right. And when you negatively eat or you eat bad food and it starts to affect that, right? That cell wall starts to break down and it gets porous, right? It gets more like open and things are allowed to go through now. Okay. That's, if you've ever heard of the term leaky gut syndrome, that's kind of the idea behind that. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yep.
They're leaking into the gut or leaking past the gut.
Yep.
But do you know what's directly behind the gut? Your body's immune function. So if all this stuff is permeating into the stomach or through the stomach into your immune system and into your immune function, it actually gets into your blood system, which goes right into your brain too.
Right.
This is where autoimmune diseases start to develop. And there's a lot of evidence now, people with things like serious autoimmune diseases. I'm talking Crohn's, I'm talking MS, I'm talking like, lupus, all that stuff, have really, really good benefits if you pay attention to gut health and nutrition. Wow. You can really start to make a difference in healing your body.
Yeah.
Really cool.
That makes a ton of sense. And I want to back up a little bit because I love the way you answered the question that I was asking. It might have been kind of why I asked it, because I knew that there was a real good answer behind it. Not the way that I was thinking, but the fact that, I was asking the question of, is the brain misinterpreting these signals and giving us off a side effect? But maybe it's that the ways we've been going about treating some of these things has been wrong all along.
We've been thinking about treating the brain, right? Maybe we should be thinking about treating the stomach.
Right. Yeah. And we knew that the neurotransmitters were an issue. It was clear to us that certain types of neurotransmitters were issues with certain diagnoses that affect our brain and our emotions and our psychology, but we might have been trying to fix them the wrong way. So I wanted to hit that point home, because I think you nailed that. But the other thing that makes so much sense is our immune response to this, because anytime something, the basic job of the immune system is anytime something is in and around the body that's not supposed to be there, the immune system's job is to investigate it and attack it.
Yep.
So when stuff that is supposed to be in our body, but is not supposed to be in that part of our body, in other words, leaking outside our gut, just into the abyss of our torso, basically, the immune system's gonna do its job. So that's, it's very interesting that could be something that kicks off autoimmune type disorders that then show up in different ways, right? Like maybe that switch in the immune system started there, and then other things within our own body start to get attacked from that mechanism.
And that's a good segue into kind of how I think about that, right? Well, before I get into that, I like to call that the blueprint system. But before I talk about that, That's kind of a good point, right? And if that stuff's constantly leaking into the immune stuff, and that in your immune system is constantly firing, what's happening, what are the symptoms, right? And that's where you start to, your body's starting to fight back against you, essentially, right?
Right.
um, and again, that was a good segue in how to think about this stuff, right? So a lot of these autoimmune diseases too, they know are kind of genetic. Like Crohn's disease is genetic. My mother has Crohn's, or hereditary, right? So my mother has Crohn's, and it's in my family line. Okay, so I was passed down with that, and the way I like to think about and explain to people is it's like a blueprint, right? So I was born with the blueprint for Crohn's, and it determines, like, my lifestyle and what I do determines whether I activate that blueprint or don't, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a brief period where I was in college. I was a very heavy drinker in college, and then I stopped drinking for 4 years, right after the 4 year period of college, and I went right into the gym, and I started to abuse gym supplements pretty bad. Not steroids or anything like that, but I'm talking, I took fat burners and BCAAs and protein powders and pre-workouts, and you name it, I took it, right? And that I did that for 3-4 years. So that, like, 8 year period of just destroying my stomach with chemicals and booze and alcohol and bad food, and that triggered that blueprint for me to, oh, now I have Crohn's. And that's exactly when I started to feel the symptom, or the negative effects of what was happening.
Yeah.
So,
No, that makes a lot of sense. I love how you framed that, because you're right. All of us have certain genetic tendencies,
yeah,
but we don't all have to activate them if we know what they are, and we know that they can be mitigated, if they can be mitigated. There are certain hereditary things that can't be, but this is a great example of something that can. So I don't want to derail some of your talking points or your thought process here, but one question that pops into my head as I think about this is, does some of this information, specifically maybe this, I don't want to keep using the term leaky gut, because I know that it's kind of its own diagnosis, but sort of what gets created in this situation where part of the gut becomes more permeable and things are able to pass out of it into the body. Is that where some things like gluten intolerance might come from, or dairy intolerance might come from? Like, maybe those are like lower levels of that sort of immune response that are happening because we're doing things to that gut matrix that are changing the way our body reacts to certain foods.
That's a great question, man, actually. So yes and no. So lactose, right? So lactose is actually a deficiency. Lactose, most people in the Western world are lactose intolerant. They just don't know it.
Sure.
Drinking milk is not like a normal thing.
We're the only animals that drink another animal's milk.
Right.
Yeah.
And so people who are lactose intolerant actually are deficient in the enzyme that breaks apart the lactose.
Gotcha.
So you can digest it, right? So, but in the terms of gluten, it's less about the gluten, and this is a whole nother podcast, my friend, we could talk about. They actually are starting to think that because instead of the gluten, they think it's the glyphosate that they spray on the gluten, which is the chemical that they use to dry it out. And what they find is they think that permeates the gut and causes the quote unquote gluten intolerance, because there's a lot of cases of people who are quote unquote intolerant to gluten going to like Italy and eating pasta and being fine, or going to Europe and eating pasta and being fine, because they have a different system of, treating their crops, right?
Right. Well, that was one of the big reasons I asked, because I know that there are a lot of practices, most foods that have a high concentration of gluten in them tend to be stuff that's going to be a little more processed. Anyways.
Right.
So that makes total sense.
So that's, I mean, you're basically ingesting a chemical that's permeating the stomach, right? And so that's what's triggering it instead of the gluten, So, and that's again kind of a hypothesis right now, but there are lots of cases of people, like I said, going to Europe or Italy and who have a gluten intolerance, and they're fine eating pasta and pizza and shit over there. So the whole, a whole slew of people that do that.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Interesting stuff. And it's not just autoimmune diseases too, man. Like a lot of people just think it's serious stuff, but acne and skin diseases or issues, obesity, they actually think that there's a certain strain of bad bacteria that causes obesity.
Oh wow.
And things like constantly getting sick. If you have a bad stomach environment, you know, a lot of people have a lot of sickness. So if you're a person who constantly gets sick, you know, checking your nutrition and making sure your gut health is important.
Yeah. Well, no, it's a great point, and that kind of leads me into my next big question is, now that we know what three mechanisms can kind of be kicked off in our body
Yep.
if things in our
Yep.
gut aren't where they need to be, what are some things we definitely need to avoid, and what are a few things that we can start doing very quickly and easily? I know you're going to give us some quick solutions,
Yeah.
and I definitely want you to give us some long-term solutions as well, things that
Yeah.
people are probably going to have to work on a little bit.
Yeah.
But what are things that we need to avoid right now, and a few quick things we can do right now that can give us really quick action steps? And then let's kind of talk about some of the long-term stuff too.
Sounds good, man. Yeah. So I would say the things to kind of watch out for, right? Antibiotics. Okay.
Mm.
Antibiotics, antibios literally means kill bacteria or kill life, right? So their job is to kill off bad bacteria, but they also kill off good bacteria. It's kind of like dropping a nuclear bomb in your stomach. Okay. So not great if you're trying to keep your gut health intact and healthy. Obviously, if you severely need them, you need to take them.
Sure.
Um, but also understand what they're for, right? They're for viruses. They're not for the everyday cold. So, use them for what they're intended for, and not, just every time you feel like you're getting sick. Okay.
Right.
Processed foods, another big one. Making sure, like everything we just talked about, the processed foods, especially the gluten stuff. Fake chemicals. Okay, a lot of the fake sugars they're finding out are having negative impacts on gut health.
Mm.
Just real quick, kind of the way I like to explain that is, if I threw 30 people in a room for a month and made you chain smoke cigarettes, like the conclusion after a month would be cigarettes don't cause cancer, because it hasn't been like long enough for that to develop yet.
Sure.
Obviously, it's going to happen, but um, same thing kind of with the sugars, right? They're a new product. They've only been introduced to the foods in like since like the 70s, 80s, 90s. And so now we're just starting to get the data back where it's like, yeah, this stuff is having a really bad impact. I mean, back when you were a kid, how many kids had a food allergy?
None.
Not how many kids have food allergies now? Everyone, right?
All of them. Yeah.
That's just not a coincidence, right? It's also not a coincidence that the rate of like depression and anxiety and stuff has gone up at the same time all the stuff has been introduced to the market. Okay, so pay
Yeah.
attention to the processed foods, the fake chemicals. Alcohol is a big one. Lack of sleep is a big one, and stress is a big one. Okay, like I just said at the beginning, the stomach and the brain are connected. So if your brain is freaking out, your stomach's freaking out too. So controlling the stress is a big one.
I'm sure everyone can relate to that. I mean, that is 100% my
Yep.
stress response. Historically, it's actually somehow gotten a lot better, maybe because I'm doing some of the things you're about to talk about. But historically, when I was younger, stress and anxiety 100% uh showed up in my
Yep.
in my gut. That was
Yeah.
really the aside from feeling the flightiness of the anxiety, the
Nausea,
the
you
gut,
know,
yeah, the gut was where I felt it for sure.
or even something other than that, like gut feelings are a thing. Like that's literally your brain trying to tell you something. If you get butterflies in your stomach when you see your wife or something like that, that's the brain being, ooh, I like her. It's all connected.
Yeah.
So everything that you feel in the stomach is the brain. So stress is a big one, and when I went through the process of healing my Crohn's and fixing myself, I'm now, 7 weeks off my medications. Actually, I
Nice.
stopped completely off my meds,
Awesome.
um, and I'm just managing with food and gut health stuff. But right now, that was a big focus, was cutting back a lot on caffeine.
Ah,
Um, for the stress factor, but also doing a lot of stuff around that, like some deep breathing techniques. I do a lot of acupuncture. I really enjoy acupuncture. That helps me a lot. Massages are always good too. So anything that kind of like calms you down, or kind of good quick fixes, is a good way to calm your mind down.
yeah,
In terms of nutrition, obviously getting away from the processed foods and going to a more whole foods diet. That might be more of a longer process. Obviously, you want to take your time with that.
right, right.
Weaning off of caffeine, like I just said, I know caffeine is kind of like a necessary thing for some people, but it does put you in that fight or flight response mode, which is a stressor, and that will cause negative effects.
Yeah.
And then just paying attention to what you eat. Like I said before, the fake sugars, the foods, working on the parasympathetic stress stuff, working in good stress activities, and just staying calm as
Yeah.
much as possible.
Yeah. No, those are great.
Yeah.
Those are great tips. I think the other thing people really need to watch out for, and I think this is where I think back to my childhood. I grew up in the 90s. So that was when processed foods hit their peak. I think, they had been developing them since like the 70s and 80s, like you talked about,
Yeah,
but it hit its strides, and the bigger strides that were made in the technology that created that processed foods hit when I was a kid.
absolutely.
So as we have this conversation, I go, well, I kind of know why that my stress showed up immediately in my gut when I had stress and anxiety issues that I dealt with, because my diet was way on the spectrum of processed foods. I mean, I know that can be a normal response anyways, but I think it was heightened in that area, or I wonder if it's heightened in that area because of what we're talking about here.
And I mean, even like if you just think about it, look at the state of just society today, right? Like a lot of the younger generation has a lot of issues with stress and anxiety problems,
Yeah.
and that, where do you think this is coming from? Like I don't think it's a coincidence, that, to your point, it hit in the 90s. When I'm a 90s kid too, so it was like part of a balanced breakfast. Make sure you get your honey nut Cheerios, your waffles, and your juices, right? Like
Pop Tarts. Don't forget your Pop
Pop
Tarts.
Tarts, right? Like there's nothing nutritious about that. There's no
Oh,
protein. It's all processed stuff. It's full of sugar,
yeah.
full of dyes and chemicals, right? Like, and you're giving it to kids. So
Yeah.
it's people wonder why we have a health epidemic, a mental problem, and there's a lot of issues with the younger generations these days because we're not feeding them correctly, man.
And we throw social media in the mix, and then
Well, there's your stress factor, right? You get
right.
the I'm
You're
not good enough all the time. You get I got to be
yeah,
as good as this person,
yeah.
and that really kind of puts you in a negative light.
That's a great way to that's a really great point you made, and I want to make sure we hit that home, because I think a lot of people think that all of these issues,
Mhm.
these mental health issues, stem almost 100% from social media.
Mhm.
But the point you bring up, that that's the stress catalyst
Yeah.
for all of these other sort of environmental and diet related issues, is probably exactly right. The other thing I think of too is products that do advertise themselves as much healthier, or actually healthy versions of products that we know are processed and bad for us,
Mhm.
yet they still contain ingredients, even if they are in a very small amount,
Yep.
that could kick some of this stuff off. And I'm going to give the example of a friend of mine who's somewhat knowledgeable in these too. I consulted him about this. Uh, the Celsius Energy,
Yeah.
they literally advertise themselves as live fit.
Yeah.
Uh, and most of their ingredients are good, but the last ingredients on their list is sucralose,
Yeah.
which is a
Fake chemical.
sugar
Yeah.
chemical derivative that's actually derived from chlorine, I
Yeah.
learned. So you're literally putting a chlorine derivative
Yeah.
in your body. And some people are drinking a few of those a day, but because they say live fit, and because they say most of their ingredients are good. I mean,
Yeah.
when you look at that, it is a lot of non-processed stuff in there until you get to that last ingredient. So people have to be careful about even using products that advertise themselves as healthy, I think, and kind of educate themselves on those things.
Yeah, and like I don't want to scare anybody, right? So like a little
Yes.
bit here and there is not gonna hurt you,
Yeah.
right? Like if you go out and you have a donut every once in a while, or you have a Celsius every once in a while, it's not gonna hurt you. Okay, you're gonna be fine. We're talking about chronic users of this stuff, but you got to think of what the traditional American diet is. The traditional American diet is a constant influx of all this stuff we've just been talking about.
Yeah.
And you're right. Unfortunately, in the marketing stuff, some of the worst is the gym stuff.
Yeah.
The protein powders, the protein bars, the fat burners, the pre-workouts, all that stuff has all that crap in it. And then you start to take it daily, and then you start replacing natural foods with it, and then you start, you're living off of it, and all of a sudden you're just ingesting chemicals.
Yeah.
I say it all the time. Protein powder, again, every once in a while is fine, but how do you take a chicken and turn it into chocolate powder? It's still a processed food.
Right.
It has to go through some sort of processing.
Yeah.
It's not a natural thing. But if you have it every once in a while, you're fine. But if you're living off of it, you might want to double check what's going on.
Yeah. No, that's great advice. Great advice. I'm glad you really hit that point home. That's fantastic. Well, great. How can people learn a little bit more about what you're doing with nutrition over at Iron Legion Strength, Andrew?
Yeah, so you can get in contact with me directly. You can find me on Facebook, Andrew Herman, or you can find me on Instagram, aherman.fit, or you can email me, Andrew at ironlegionstrengthco.com. You can also visit our website, ironlegionstrengthco.com. All of my nutrition information is on there. All of our coaching options and stuff are on there. We do online coaching. I do online nutrition. But gut health is definitely one of my big focuses. It's definitely one of my big, I would say, strengths in coaching. It's very personal to me. And I've helped a lot of people who have some pretty severe issues, kind of stabilize themselves or even come out of it.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, if you want to either learn more or want to start working with me, feel free to get in contact with me. I'm always down to talk about this stuff. I love talking about it.
Yeah.
It's fun stuff. So, and super cool. Like I said at the start of this, it's the forefront of kind of nutrition right now. So it's super interesting stuff.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Nutrition stuff is always nutrition research has always been hard because there's so many variables to control.
Yeah.
But with some of this gut health stuff, I feel like they're really on a roll here. And
Yeah.
and it seems to me, without having as broad of a knowledge in the subject as you do, that they've thought about enough things to realize that maybe there's less they need to control and there's more they just need to look at from a mechanism standpoint here to
Yeah.
figure out what that looks like. So that's awesome. I think that's
I truly believe, Phil, if we take a hard look at the nutrition of this country, not just the food pyramid, but like get a hard look at it, you would solve a lot of problems, especially, mentally and physically. So
yeah, agreed. Agreed. Well, great. Andrew, thank you so much. This is a fantastic conversation.
thanks,
Everybody go
Phil.
check that out. We will make sure all that contact info for Andrew and for Iron Legion is in the show notes. And thank you all for listening and tuning in as always. And go make it a great week. We'll see you back here next time on the Strength for Your Purpose podcast. Bye, everybody.
Thank you guys.